Hey everybody, what's going on? Hopefully I have I forgot to check if the microphone was still on. But yeah, so hey everybody, it's Monday night and I'm here doing a little movie discussion like I would normally do on Monday night. So probably because a lot of you guys asked me about it on the YouTube, community tab thingy or whatever, like an update on Tom's dad. And I hate to say, but it's not really great news. Seems like yesterday he kind of rallied and he seemed like he was a little bit better. But today, Tom went there and his other family members are there. And basically, this evening, the doctors told them, well, we've done all that we can for him. And we don't think that he's going to recover. So they are making arrangements to take him to hospice tomorrow. So I asked Tom, I'm like, are you okay? And stuff like that. And Tom's like, yeah, I'm fine. He's like, I was expecting this. So it's like, at least I was here. You know what I mean? So it's that. So I said, well, do you want me to update everybody on the show? And he said, yeah. He said, he said to tell you guys that nature's taking over. That's what he said. Because he's like, his dad is just, at this point, is just like sick of this shit. You know what I mean? He's in a lot of pain. He has like multiple things going on at one time. And he's just like, I'm just kind of tired of being in the hospital. And he's just tired of dealing with it. So we'll see what happens. But they are going to take him to hospice tomorrow. So Tom, I think, is still at the hospital. I just talked to him about 20 minutes ago. So that's what's going on with that. And like I said, I thought everybody would want an update. So as I said, I'm not entirely sure when Tom's going to be back. He said that he's like, well, I wanted to come back before the end of the week because I don't want to have to pay to rent the car for another day. Because he paid for the car rental for a week. And he's like, and it was kind of expensive. So he's like, I don't want to, have to go over. But we'll see how it goes. You know what I mean? Like I said, I can do the show without him, if I need to. But he's kind of wanting to be back like before the end of the week. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, like I said, I talked to him. He seems fine. You know what I mean? Like I said, he was expecting it and he was just glad that he got to be there. But like, we'll see what's gonna happen. You know what I mean? So I might talk to him on maybe like over FaceTime or something like that, like later on, because we talked last night too. But yeah. Danny says, is that a wig or is that your actual hair? It's my actual hair today, actually. My hair was getting so fucked up and messy looking that I was just kind of like, Jesus Christ. I got up this morning and I was like, I really need to cut my bangs and I really need to like do my roots again and shit like that. So I cut the bangs and everything. It's funny because I had to run a bunch of errands today. Like I had to return some shit and all this other stuff. And so I stopped and got lunch at this like little Italian place. And I sent Tom a picture. He's like, oh, send me a picture of the place. So I sent him a picture of the restaurant, and then I took one of myself. He's like, oh, you cut your bangs. You know what I mean? So I was like, yeah, finally. Because they were getting to a point where they were just like way down here in my eyes, and I had to like sweep them over to the side, and I fucking hate having to do that. But I'm just like too lazy. I'm so lazy that I never cut them. It only takes a minute. I don't know why I do that. But yeah, so finally I cut them today. So yeah, I do like them a lot better when they're short, but they grow super fast. Tammy says, got my mom's arrangements all finished today. Got to go to her apartment tomorrow and start cleaning that. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's just kind of like whatever happens with Tom's dad, it's like, they're going to have to go through, all of his stuff and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know like what he wanted for a funeral. And so I don't really know what's going on there. You know what I mean? But I just wanted to like kind of update everybody, at one time. So you guys knew what was going on. But, it's kind of a bummer, but like he said, I was expecting it. I'm bummed out because of that, and I'm also bummed out because, Tom's not here, and, I miss him and stuff, and so I want him to come home, but, you know what I mean? It's like he's got to do what he's got to do. It's weird him not being here. Well, because like I said, the only time in... How long have we been together? For 13 years or however long we've been together. The only time we've ever been apart, I think we've only been apart 2 weeks plus 5 days in that entire 13 years. That's the only time. You know what I mean? So it's weird, like him not being here. You know what I mean? Because we're not like joined at the hip or anything, but we're almost always like in the house together, So it's just very strange him not being here. The cats are freaking out. It's like they don't know what's going on and everything. So, I'm just kind of hoping he comes back. But, Are you food cheating on Tom? Hey, he's food cheating on me too, because it's like he sent me a thing, and it's like yesterday he's like, hey, I found this Chinese buffet in the little town that he's in. He's like, yeah, it's pretty good. It's not as big, but they have some different stuff. And then like last night he was like, oh, I'm at this place called Ward's, which I guess is a chain, but it's only in Mississippi. Like, because I was like, I never heard of that, because he sent me the sign, and he's like, oh, they have such a cool logo and all this other stuff. And I was like, I never really heard of that. And he's like, yeah, they have like chili burgers and hot dogs and stuff like that, like southern stuff, biscuits. And yeah, he said it was pretty good. But yeah, he was sending me pictures of the stuff of the place and the sign and everything. So he's doing a lot of food cheating, okay? And I was, like I said, I was out running errands today, and I was like, man, I don't like cooking. So you know what I mean? I know that's pitiful, but I could cook if I wanted to, but it's like I just don't want to. So it's like whenever he's not here, I'm just like, shit, man, I'm just gonna go to Publix and get a sub or something like that. But I was up by the UPS store because I had to return a bunch of stuff, and there was like this little Italian place over there. And I was like, I wonder if that's any good. So I went in there. It was pretty good actually, and it was the lunch special was actually quite reasonable. It was $9, and you got I got a big thing of pasta and a big thing of garlic knots, and I was like, shit, man. That's all I ate today, because that was plenty. You know what I mean? Yeah. Tammy said, yeah, the Hubs didn't come up here with me because my mom's basically just having a small viewing. Then it's getting cremated. Plus, we have 2 dogs and 2 cats he's taking care of. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like when this whole shit first happened, like Tom was like, well, why don't you come with me? And I was just like, well, okay. But then I was like, oh wait, it's like who's gonna take care of the kitties? And it's I don't want to leave them alone. They will flip out. And I was like, and also, like freelance work, like I have freelance work coming in whenever, and I kind of have to do that like when it comes in, and I didn't want to have to take like 40 bajillion laptops and all this other kind of shit, so you know what I mean. But so I was like, well, that sucks, but Tom's like, it's okay, it's he's like, I'll be back soon, don't worry about it. So like I said, we'll see how it goes, but I'm kind of bummed out. But let's cheer ourselves up though by talking about a movie from the 1940s about a serial killer. This is actually a really, really good movie. Subjective Perspective Collective says, I still haven't seen The Spiral Staircase, but I've heard it's a proto-Giallo. We'll watch it sooner than later. Yeah, it's kind of, I don't know if I'd call it a proto-Giallo. It's kind of a proto-slasher, though, for real. Which I know that Giallo and slasher are kind of similar, but Giallo is very specific. This does have some very slashery elements to it. Now, the reason that I wanted to do this one is because I'm still working on this gargantuan video that I'm doing that's a history of horror movies. Like I said, I think I talked about it. I was talking about it a long time ago because I was like, oh, I wanted to get it up for Halloween. That didn't even come close to happening. I got maybe like half of the script written, and then I was like, oh my God, there's no way. So then I'm like, oh, maybe I'll get it up for Christmas, or maybe I'll get it for New Year's, and still. It is like I had the script all written. It's actually about half done, like as far as the editing goes. I'm at the end of the 1970s, so I just have like a few more decades, and then it'll be done. Like I said, I'm hoping to get it up. I was hoping to get it up by the end of last week, but obviously that didn't happen because a bunch of other stuff intervened. Like I said, Tom having to go and all this other kind of stuff, and I didn't really feel like working on it. But I am going to get it done. But the thing about it was that while I was working on that, and I was going back through all the classic old movies from, the day and everything. And I was talking about the 1940s, and I was just kind of like, oh man, The Spiral Staircase, I remember seeing that a really long time ago. And that was another one that I wanted to rewatch because I remember really liking it. And I was like, oh, I should rewatch that and like do a review on it because, like I said, I remember really liking it. Now, as far as, I don't know if it's streaming anywhere else. I watched it on Plex for free. So whether it's on another streaming platform, I don't know, but that's where I found it. Like you might have, did it have commercials? It might have had commercials. Now I can't remember. It was a couple days ago that I watched it, but I mean, Plex usually has commercials, but they have a bunch of stuff on there that's free. You can usually find it for free, and I found it for free. So this movie, so I feel like, and this was kind of reinforced to me when since I've been working on this history of horror movies video. It's always like been hard for me because I love horror movies from every decade, right? The 1940s is the hardest for me to like find. There's good shit, but it's not as much because it does kind of seem like a lot of the movies that came out in the 40s, there was kind of a lull, you know what I mean? Because like after the big like Universal monsters and everything like that in the 30s, In the 1940s, it seemed like everything was just like sequels to the Universal monster movies. And then, like in the mid 40s, it was World War II and people weren't really going to the movies as much. And it's like they didn't really seem to want to go to horror movies in particular. So it seemed like in the mid 1940s, it seemed to go more in like a psychological horror thriller direction. Like Alfred Hitchcock, like he made Spellbound, I think that was 1945. And then this movie came out in 1946. And this one, it's like I said, it's usually called a psychological horror or a thriller. It has some kind of film noir kind of aspects to it as well. The funny thing to me was that at the time in 1946 when it came out, it was actually called a mystery romance, which I guess, I mean, I don't know if I'd go so far as to call it a romance. There is kind of like a little bit of a love story in it, but it's not like a sappy love story, you know what I mean? It's kind of on the fringes. But, and like Subjective Perspective said, this has been called a proto-slasher, and I can totally see why. Because even though obviously the term serial killer did not exist until like the 70s, I think before that I'd seen it called mass murderer. I'd seen phrases like that thrown around, but I'd never seen serial killer used until the 1970s. But this is absolutely about a serial killer. Like I said, there've been ones before that. I mean, Fritz Lang's M, that was from the 30s. That was about a serial killer. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like that they never did it, but it was just kind of like that was more like they didn't really call those horror movies, and they didn't call this a horror movie either. And I don't know if I'd call it a horror movie. It's psychological horror. It's a thriller, kind of. It's like Psycho, kind of, but it's proto-Psycho. So the thing about it is that there's stuff in this that probably a modern slasher fan would recognize, in the sense that I don't know if I'd go so far as to say it's like, point of view shots from the killer and stuff, but it is kind of like that, you know what I mean? Because you do kind of see things from the killer's perspective. There are some kind of Giallo-esque elements where they show like close-ups of eyes, like the killer's eye and stuff like that, like in a shadow, which is kind of cool. So you can see where the kind of slasher thing came from, and this totally has that. So this was actually directed by wait a minute, yeah, Allison says she's mute, not deaf. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, she's mute, she's not deaf. But she can't talk. Yeah, we'll get into that. So this was directed by Robert Siodmak, the German director. Now, he did a shit ton of movies, not just horror movies, just a ton of different kinds. But I think probably horror fans will know him for directing Son of Dracula from 1943. That was where I knew him from, because I knew that name. So the movie is actually adapted from a novel that came out in 1933, and it was called Some Must Watch by Ethel Lena White. Now this is crazy. I didn't actually know this, but this was apparently a very popular novel to adapt, because even prior to the movie coming out, they had done like a radio play of it, and after this movie came out, like 3 years later, they did another radio production of it in 1949. And then it got 3 more film adaptations. There was one in 1961 that had Elizabeth Montgomery, like famed from Bewitched, and Lillian Gish in it. And then there was one in 1975 that had Jacqueline Bisset in it. And one in 2000 that had Nicolette Sheridan in it. I have seen none of those, and a lot of them seem kind of hard to get hold of, so I don't know if they were all that good. I think the 2000 one might have been made for TV, or maybe the 1975 one was made for TV. I can't really remember. But it's just weird that there's like 5 or 6 different adaptations of this like one book. That lady must have been, the lady that wrote it must have just been raking in the royalties, I'm just saying. It was adapted so many times. But like I said, I think the more recent, the one from the 60s and 70s and 2000, I hadn't heard of those, so I don't know if they're any good or not. I mean, I would assume that if they were any good, that people would talk about them, so I don't know. So what happened with the 1946 version is that the famed producer, David O. Selznick, he had actually bought the rights to the novel. Now, he was going to cast Ingrid Bergman in the lead. But then later on, various things happened, and he ended up selling the rights to the book, as well as a bunch of other rights, like to other properties that he owned, to RKO Pictures, because he wanted to fund this Western that he was making, and he's like, well, I don't need this stuff, so he just sold it to RKO. So RKO starts production on the movie in 1945, and they put Dorothy McGuire in the lead role. She's great in this, by the way. Now, she actually won an Oscar like a little more than a year after this for the 1947 movie Gentleman's Agreement. I recognized her from Old Yeller from 1957. She was in that, and she was also in Swiss Family Robinson from 1960. So you might recognize her from that too, because I knew she was familiar, and then I looked it up and I'm like, oh yeah, that's where I know her from. Also, this movie has just a fantastic performance by the legendary Ethel Barrymore, who was an actor for more than 60 years, I believe. Obviously, the Barrymore family, very famous acting family. She was known as the First Lady of American Theater, so she's in this too, and I love her in this. She's fantastic. She just plays this crotchety old lady. She's great. So, Allison says Dorothy McGuire was great in Enchanted Cottage. Oh, I should see that actually, because I don't think I've ever seen that. So, the story of the Spiral Staircase is actually, I didn't even realize this when I was watching it, but then when I was thinking about it, I was like, oh yeah, I guess so. It's set over a day and a night, so it's just a single day, pretty much, that all of the shit happened. So it was quite a day, is what I'm saying. Now, it's actually set in the early 20th century. I don't know if they say specifically in the movie, but when I looked it up, they said it's supposed to be 1906, so there's that. And it's in this little village in Vermont somewhere, So Dorothy McGuire plays the main character, whose name is Helen. Now, she's a mute woman, and she works as this kind of caregiver, companion type person to this kind of sick old woman who lives in this massive, kind of family estate, right? So the beginning of the movie, it's Helen's day off, and she's at this inn, I guess, like a hotel type thing, like in the village, and they're doing like a movie showing, because I guess this is 1906, so they didn't have movie theaters per se. They just kind of had this room with like a curtain across it, and you went in there to and they had a projector, you know what I mean? So that's what with a bunch of chairs. So that's what she's doing. She's sitting there with a bunch of other people, like watching a silent movie. Now, while her and the other people are watching movie, this is an inn or a hotel or whatever, so people live there. So there's a bunch of rooms upstairs. So while they're all watching the movie, this woman in one of the rooms upstairs gets murdered. Now, this woman has what all of the characters refer to as an affliction, which in modern parlance you would call a disability, right? In her case, I believe she's a paraplegic. So they have the constable comes there, and everybody's freaking out, and then he's questioning everybody. And he gives some exposition about this is actually the third recent murder that has happened, and all of the victims were disabled somehow. This one is a paraplegic. There was one that had a really bad a disfiguring scar on her face, and then there was one that was quote unquote simple-minded. That's what he said. So I was like, okay. So again, this is 3 victims now, so we have an official serial killer. Now, because this is kind of a small town, evidently, and everybody knows Helen and knows about her muteness, they start getting concerned that she's going to be the next target, right? So she's at this inn, and they're like, well, it's a 2-mile walk back to it's not her house, but it's where she works, and I presume she lives there as well. She's like a live-in caregiver. So they're like, okay, well, it's 2 miles away, so you better hurry up and get there before it gets dark. You don't want to get murdered too, because you never know what might happen, right? So she's walking home, and luckily for her, she gets met on the road by a friend of hers who also turns out as a potential suitor. That's where the romance part comes in. And his name is Dr. Perry, and he's played by Kent Smith, who I immediately recognized from Cat People from 1942, the Jacques Tourneur movie, that Val Lewton produced. And he actually gives her a lift back to the house, like in his horse and trap, handsome. What do they call that? I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? It's like the little thingy. Did it have a horse? Oh shit, now I can't remember. It wasn't a car because it was 1906. So there's kind of like a bit of a subplot. It kind of plays into the story like a little, not hugely, but there is like a little bit of a sideline where Dr. Perry is apparently kind of new in town. And so he has something of a rivalry going on with the village's kind of crotchety old doctor, whose name is Dr. Harvey. So there's kind of a thing about that where the old guy is like, you know, you're stealing my patients, young upstart, blah, blah, blah. And there's this whole thing about patients. Oh, he called me instead of the old guy and stuff. So, you know, there's kind of that plays into the whole thing too a little bit. So, Subjective Perspective said, are you doing spoilers? I probably will because the movie is so old. So, yeah, I probably should have said that. Allison said, I saw the one with Nicolette Sheridan. Not awful. Oh, okay. I didn't even know it existed until after I saw this one. You know what I mean? That's crazy. I don't think I ever saw a single thing that Nicolette Sheridan was in. Not that I remember. Now I'm going to have to watch them. It's all kind of interesting. Danny says, Ingrid Bergman was a fox, especially in the Hitchcock film Spellbound. Yeah, I want to do Spellbound as well, because I haven't seen that in a really long time. Yeah, the film that inspired the Phantom Killer of Texarkana during the dream sequence. Yep, that's right. But yeah, that's another great movie. That just came out like a year before this one. But yeah, so I probably will do spoilers, because like I said, it's an older movie. And I know maybe a lot of people haven't seen it, but, you know, it's hard to talk about movies without doing spoilers, you know. So I usually have a thing where if the movie is old enough, then usually I will do spoilers. But if it's new, then I won't, you know. So that's what I'm saying. So I probably will tell you who the killer is. That's all I'm going to say. So Dr. Perry is giving Helen a ride and drops her off at the front gates of the estate or whatever. And then there's this really, really good sequence. There's like this really bad storm kind of blows up out of nowhere, right? So it's just like all this wind and rain and stuff. And then Helen starts getting really nervous because as she's going up to because it's just like the front gate and there's this big long fucking driveway or whatever. And so she starts hearing rustling in the bushes like nearby. So the rustling actually turns out to just be like a little bunny rabbit or something. But we as the audience see that there's this kind of shadowy figure of a dude standing over like among the trees like watching her. You know what I mean? So we know there's somebody watching her, but she doesn't know. And then he kind of like, she drops her key like in the mud and is kind of fumbling around for it. And so he kind of starts to come at her, but she doesn't see him. You know what I mean? But then she kind of finds it and she's like, oh shit, because she's getting freaked out because she hears stuff and she wants to get back to the house. She's getting all wet. So she kind of hauls ass to the house. And then you see the stalker person, whoever it is, kind of backing off, which is like, oh, you're assuming he's like, oh, he's waiting for his moment or whatever. So she gets inside the house, and at that point, we kind of are slowly introduced to the rest of the people in the household. So the matriarch of the family is this bedridden woman named Mrs. Warren, and that's Ethel Barrymore. She's real cantankerous, but also kind of awesome. Like, I loved her. She's super cranky, and she's like my spirit animal. And she's kind of like, she kind of seems to know everything about like what's going on in the house, even though she seemingly never leaves her room. Like, I don't think she can get up or walk around or anything. So there's that. So she's there. There's also her stepson, whose name is Professor Albert Warren. And then she has, that she's the stepmom. So that's her stepson. And then it's her real son, whose name is Stephen. Now, Stephen is kind of this smirking, playboy, arrogant type dude. And he's just come back from Europe for a visit or whatever. Now, Stephen has also been apparently having an affair. Well, is it an affair? Neither of them are married. So I guess he's having a relationship with Albert's secretary, whose name is Blanche. She also seems to live in the house, I presume. So rounding out the kind of residents, potential suspects in the house, because this is like a murder mystery, you know what I mean? You got a housekeeper named Mrs. Oates, who's actually played by, guess who? Elsa Lanchester. That's right, the Bride of Frankenstein herself plays a housekeeper in this one. She's also a lot of fun. She has, her husband is Mr. Oates, who's like the groundskeeper or whatever. He's not in it a huge amount. And you have this Nurse Barker. And this part is kind of funny because there's like a running gag in the movie. I don't know if I call it a gag, but it's kind of like a running thing like through the movie where Mrs. Warren like hates the nurse. Like she's like, the nurse will come in to like do stuff, like give her medicine, and she's like, Helen can do that. Get out of my face. You know what I mean? So it's just like Mrs. Warren just like hates her so much, and she just like, she never wants her to do anything except like sit out in the hallway and leave her alone. So the nurse is always complaining. He's like, what the hell are you even paying me for? And she's like, I'm paying you to sit out in the hall now. Fuck off. You know what I mean? And it's like so funny. But it's like, I don't know. I just found that really funny. It's not like zany, like the way they do it. There's some humor in the movie, but it's not like wacky over the top humor. You know what I mean? Because I know some movies back then kind of had some kind of over the top humor in it, but it has funny stuff in it, but it's not like super wacky funny. But I just thought that was very funny that she's like, I pay you to sit out in the hall. You know what I mean? So it's like the nurse doesn't do anything. Also, you have the adorable and very good boy, Carlton, the bulldog. Now, he gets threatened with beatings several times by Mrs. Oates, a.k.a. Elsa Lanchester, because he's constantly, like, underfoot, I guess, and she's always, like, tripping over him. But, you know, he doesn't get harmed in any way, so don't worry about that. Even though she does kind of be like, I'm gonna hit you, you know what I mean? And I was like, don't you leave that dog alone. Leave the dogs alone. But he doesn't get hurt. He's fine. And he doesn't even care. He's just like, yeah, whatever, bring it. So, you know what I mean? I will also note, spoiler alert, Carlton is not the murderer. So there's that. That would be funny if the dog was the murderer. Yeah, Allison said I loved Carlton. Carlton was great. He was like the best character. He was just like, his little face was just so, he's like a pug or something, right? Or a bulldog. He's a bulldog rather. I said bulldog before. Why did I say pug? I don't know. Because I was watching a video of a pug earlier. That's why. But yeah, so he's a bulldog, and he just has like, he's just like, whatever. Just laying around on the floor so everybody can trip over him. Now, shortly after Helen gets back in the house, Mrs. Oates finds this window open that she's sure that she closed before. And, you know, like I said, this big storm blew up, so it's kind of like blowing all this wind and rain and shit like that into the window. And she's like, who the hell opened this? And then she like almost kind of like low-key blames the dog, which I was like, that really would be something if the dog had opened the window. I think she even says, you're not that clever, she says to him. And I was like, and the dog's probably like, hey, I totally did open that. That would be like super funny. But yeah, so this window is open, so you're just like, uh-oh, you know what I mean? Because you've already seen like a dude like lurking around outside. And then you actually see like the feet, like the bottom part of the legs and feet of a dude who's kind of clearly skulking around, like in the shadows of the house, like watching Helen as she's doing her shit. You know what I mean? So you're led to assume that this person has like climbed in the window and is now like skulking around the house, like I said. So, and is going to kill people. And you're assuming that this is the same person that, you know, killed the lady at the inn earlier and has perhaps followed Helen home. That's what they want you to think anyway. So Helen, because she's running late, and it's funny because everyone bitches at her, even though she's like, dude, well, she doesn't say this, but this is what I would say. She's like, dude, I was out of the movies. Somebody got murdered, like, so I had to be there for the police investigation or whatever. And then on the way home, like, there was a horrible storm. So cut me some slack, you know what I mean? But no, nobody does. So they all kind of yell at her for being late. So she goes up to talk to Mrs. Warren. And the cranky old bat kind of spookily tells her, you know, you're in danger. You should pack your bags and, like, get the fuck out of this house tonight. You know, if you won't go, you know, I want you to go. If you won't go, at least stay in this room tonight because I think you're really in danger. Now, she won't specify, like, who the danger is from or what the danger is specifically. But, you know, considering that we've seen that there is a dude creeping around the house, perhaps, you know, maybe she's psychic and she's maybe onto something, you know? Like I said, they do kind of, they kind of build up the fact that they don't say she's psychic or nothing like that, but the like the nurse and stuff is just like, I swear she knows everything that goes on in here, even though she just stays in that room, you know what I mean? So, and just like, and she always seems like she's watching you, so there's that kind of stuff. So happily for Helen, you know, as far as having to leave the house and stuff, Dr. Perry, who picked her up before, he has pretty much professed his love for her and his intention to marry her, and he wants to take her away from the house. Now, specifically, he wants to take her to a specialist in Boston who can maybe help her get her voice back. Now, it's at this point, because before they didn't really say, like, everyone knows she's mute, but nobody really says why. You're led to assume that it's some kind of psychological issue, and indeed that is what it turns out to be. So we discover that Helen has been mute since she was a child, when she witnessed her house burning down with her parents still in it. So she basically watched her parents burn to death, which, you can't blame her for not talking after that. It's a little traumatic. So the scene where we find this out is kind of weird, because Dr. Perry apparently went somewhere else and found it, because obviously Helen didn't tell anybody like why she was mute. And but Dr. Perry found out from somebody, I guess from her doctor or something, from some other doctor. So he found out about it, and he comes back and like tells her that he knows, and then he like kind of yells what happened, like, your parents burned to death, and the thing, like, he kind of grabs her by the arms and he's like yelling it into her face. And I was like, bro, you know what I mean? It seemed a little strange. So I get that he was maybe, and he seemed pretty chill up to this point. But so he just kind of went, it almost like, I don't want to say violent, but he kind of came across as like, kind of just going to shake her, you know what I mean? Because he wanted her to talk. And so, I mean, I get that he was trying to like force her to confront the trauma and get past it so she would be able to talk again. But it does kind of come out of left field a little bit. And I kind of wonder if part of the scene's purpose was maybe to cast suspicion on Dr. Perry as the murderer. Because like I said, this is a murder mystery, so everybody is going to have like motive, or they're going to try and cast suspicion on like pretty much everybody so you don't guess who it is, you know what I mean? So I wondered if this was like a scene where they were just like, hey, he can flip out and be kind of like that too, so maybe it's him, So there was that, because he seemed like pretty nice up to this point. Now, meanwhile, Blanche, who is the professor's secretary, and she was the one that's been fucking Steven, the stepson, or no, he's the real son, yeah, that's right. So they have a falling out, which is not surprising because Steven is a doucheburger. You know what I mean? He's just a real dick. So they have a fight, and Blanche decides, you know what? I'm going to leave this damn house too. I'm going to skedaddle. Like when Helen goes. Like, and Dr. Perry's like, okay, cool. I'll give you a ride. So Blanche goes, okay, I'm going to go pack my shit. I'm going to get out of here too. Now, it so happens at this point that Dr. Perry gets called away to like see another patient in town. So, and it's nighttime at this point. So he tells, okay, well, Helen and Blanche, you guys sit tight until I get back. Like, I'll be back later this evening, and then we'll get the fuck out of here. But later on, he kind of sends word back to them, oh, I won't be able to get back to the estate tonight because the patient that I went to see is like way worse than I thought, and I have to stay here with him. You know what I mean? So, and it so happens too that the only other, one of the other men in the house, who's Mr. Oates, the groundskeeper, he has to get sent into town for some ether, because Mrs. Warren, who needed the ether, I guess they just kept putting that in her face all the time to like wake her back up whenever she went out into one of her fugues or whatever. So somebody stole the ether that was there. They didn't know who, so it was gone. And so they sent Mr. Oates. They said, well, you have to go get some ether. And there wasn't any in town because Dr. Perry had already said, oh, I looked for some earlier today and they didn't have any. So he's like, well, shit, I have to go to the next town over, which is like a couple hours away. So a lot of the men are kind of being sent away, you know what I mean? So there's that kind of thing. Now, it so happens that after Dr. Perry leaves, Blanche goes down to the basement to get her suitcase to put all her shit in, and she gets murdered by this person that's been skulking around the house, apparently. So there's that. Now, I'm gonna say, like I said, and this is spoiler alert. This is a very old movie. Nostalgic Top Hat says, be sure to read the source book from the 1930s. It holds up well. I actually would like to read the book. I haven't read the book. But yeah, I usually like to read the books that these movies are based on. So up to this point, the movie has been leaning pretty hard into the theory that Steven is the killer. And there's a bunch of stuff like pointing to this. Like, for example, earlier in the story, like near the beginning, when the murder thing was when the murder was happening at the inn/movie theater situation, the constable says, "Oh, well, we've tracked the killer to this area, like where this family's house is, the estate is." The murders only started after Steven got back to town from Europe. As I mentioned, he's portrayed as just this real arrogant douche who sort of like low-key sexually harasses Blanche like every time he gets the chance. He's super pushy. And he also lies to the cops about being outside the house. Like when they tell him, it's like, he's like, I didn't even leave the house today. Even though like later on his stepbrother is all like, you've got mud all over your shoes though. You know what I mean? So why'd you lie to the police? So there's that. Now he says he lied to the police because it's like, oh, I was outside cavorting with Blanche and I didn't want anybody to know about it. But you know, he still lied to the cops about it. So they thought that was kind of sus. Now, because of all of this stuff, you're also led to assume that Mrs. Warren, who is Steven's mom, also thinks he's the murderer. Because at one point, she very cryptically says that, and she says this to Helen, it's like, oh, there's always trouble when he comes home. That's what she says. There's always trouble. Now, because of all of this setup, I'm pretty sure that modern audiences, because we know all the tropes by now, will pretty likely guess that it isn't him. Because it's really never the most obvious suspect. And you know, this was pretty early days, but I think even by this point, like, that trope was pretty well established. It's never, because in mystery novels and stuff like that, it's never the most obvious person. And if the mystery writer is good enough, then they can, you know, make the murderer, like, at the end, like, you didn't guess it was them, but then, like, once it's revealed, you're like, oh, that makes total sense. But sometimes, and I don't think it was the case with this, maybe a little bit, but it's a case where they push really hard, like, for you to think, hey, this is like red herring, like it's this person, and then so you know that it's not that person, because they're not going to make it that easy for you. Like, they're not going to make it that obvious, and you know that they're trying to, like, distract from somebody else. So I feel like I said, I feel like this was, like, right on the edge, because it was very clear that they were trying to make you think that it was Steven. So like I said, modern audience, that I was just kind of like, well, it can't be him, because they really want me to think it's him, so I know it's not. So Helen, though, probably not surprisingly, because even Steven's mom thinks it's him, Helen also thinks it's him. So she's the one, she's down in the basement. I can't remember why she went down there, but she goes down there, and she's the one that finds Blanche's body. And then Steven shows up, conveniently, like seconds later, and, you know, again, understandably, she freaks the fuck out, like, as you would, and just bolts. And then she does the smart thing and locks his ass in the cellar, because she thinks he's the killer, right? Then she attempts to call the police, I guess momentarily in her panic, like forgetting that she can't talk. So she picks up the phone, and it's 1906, so phones were kind of a new technology, you know what I mean? So she picks it up, and then she's just kind of, you can see the look in her face, like, oh shit, you know what I mean? Like, I kind of forgot. And like, the lady at the other end is like, you know, what's going on? Like, number please, or whatever the operator is saying. And she's just sitting there, like, flipping out because she can't say anything. So then she sees Albert, the stepbrother, and she's just like flipping out, and she's like running to him, and she's like, and then so she writes down, she's like, Steven killed Blanche, and it's like, and I locked him in the cellar, you know? Now, at this point, I admit for a second, I was just kind of like, wouldn't it be something? Because I was just being fanciful earlier when I said, wouldn't it be funny if they made the bulldog the killer? Because that really would be something, wouldn't it? But I said, wouldn't it be funny if they made it that Dr. Perry was the killer, just because it would have been such a surprise, because he was the least obvious motherfucker, right? In hindsight, I'm glad that they did not do that, because there wasn't really any build up for that. There wasn't anything pointing to him being guilty other than that one scene where he very strangely got very intense, like in her face about, and your parents burned to death, you know what I mean? And I was just like, bro, you know what I mean? Chill out. Like I said, I get what he was trying to do. He's a doctor and he was trying to help her and everything like that, but I was like, that's still kind of fucked up. So I was like, but there wasn't anything else like pointing to him being that. And so I feel like if they had made him the killer, it would have been just kind of like a cheap maneuver just for shock value or whatever. So it turns out, again, spoiler alert. Yeah, Allison said the cat did it. I mean, maybe. I mean, the cat pushed something off the mantle and it fell on their head and killed them. I'm sure that there has been at least one time in history that must have happened. So the cat really did do it. And the cat doesn't give a shit either. He's just like, whatever. Just pushing stuff off the mantle like you do. So there was that. So spoiler alert, it turns out that the killer is actually the first person that I thought it was. Like, as soon as this character was introduced, I was just kind of like, oh, that's the motherfucker right there. And I was right. You know what I mean? It was the first person that I thought of. It turned out to be Professor Albert. That's who the killer is. And his motivation, they don't go super into, because like I said, this was the 40s and the book came out in the 1930s. So you didn't really get, you know, he was a serial killer, but you didn't really get these kind of deep dives into like serial killer psychology like you would maybe get nowadays. You know, even Psycho didn't really have that too much. They just kind of had a little bit of exposition at the end, like as to why Norman Bates did what he did. And it was the same kind of thing here, where they had established earlier on that both Albert and Stephen, they had the same dad, you know what I mean? Because the Mrs. Warren was the stepmom, so they had the same father. But their father was like this big, like, great white hunter type. And he thought basically that both of the sons were pansies, essentially. They didn't use that word, but that's what he meant. You know, none of them liked hunting and none of them liked guns, and they weren't manly man and everything like that. So they were like big, huge disappointments. So he would always kind of berate them for being, you know, weak ass bitches or whatnot. So because all of that had so warped Albert's sensibility, that he decided that he was going to target people who were weak and imperfect in some way. Hence why he went after women that had disabilities, because they had something wrong with them. So obviously they needed to be eliminated. You know what I mean? So that's kind of, like I said, it wasn't a huge like psychological thing, but they kind of just went into a little bit like that's why he killed people. He was also so sneaky, because I'm sitting there thinking, well, it's like, what, he only just started killing people just now? Like, even though he's like in his 40s or however old he was. But what he was doing was that he would only do shit, like he would only commit crimes when Stephen was home, so that he could kind of like blame it on him. You know what I mean? Like, he was trying to like allay suspicion, because Stephen was such a douche that everybody believed, even his mom believed he was the killer, which that's gotta hurt. You know what I mean? So there was that. But yeah, so he had enough self-control to like wait until Stephen was home, and he's like, oh, now I'm going to go out and kill a bunch of people, and then they'll just think it's him, even though they can't really prove it. You know what I mean? So it's that kind of thing. So at this point, Albert reveals this. He's like, oh, I'm so glad that you locked Stephen in the basement. Like, all of the men are gone now. Like, Mr. Oates went to town, and Dr. Perry had to go on a thing, and you know, and then you locked Stephen in the basement, so wahaha, you know, now I'm gonna kill you, because she is also imperfect, because she can't talk. So at the last minute, I love this ending. I had to say, I love this. At the last minute, like, she's just like, oh shit, like, and he's gonna kill her, and then the badass elderly Avenger, Mrs. Warren, staggers out her bed for the first time. I didn't even know she could walk, actually. She just kind of staggers out to bed and blows her fucking stepson away with her husband's hunting rifle. Just blam, 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 blam. She just like fucking shoots the shit up. They don't show it. Like, they show the gun going off and he just kind of slides down the wall, but they don't show bullet holes like they would nowadays, because, you know, it's the 40s. They can't show people getting like blasted like that. And I love too how he's sliding down the wall like, oh shit, like he's dying and stuff, and she's like, murder her, you know what I mean? Like, she just like wanted him to hear her say it like while he was dying. I'm like, that is fucking rad. I love that. So yeah, he's like sliding down the wall and dying, and she's like saying murder to his face, and I was like, that is badass. So Helen, I mean, because, you know, any movie, I think every movie that I've ever seen that had a mute character, something traumatic is going to happen and they're going to scream and then they're going to be able to talk again. And, you know what I mean? And like I said, this was the 40s, so this was probably not a huge trope. But then nowadays, you know that if there's a mute character, something bad's going to happen, they're going to scream and then they're like, oh, yeah, I can talk. You know what I mean? And that's what happens here. She sees him get shot and she's like, wah, you know what I mean? And she freaks out and then she decides she can talk again. So, Stephen gets released from the basement. He's probably a little put out, I imagine. And Mrs. Warren, who, you know, staggering out of her bed and shooting her stepson, has plumb tuckered her out. I mean, she's dying anyway. Now, she actually, to her credit, does profusely apologize to Stephen for thinking that he was the killer this whole time. And I was like, well, that's nice that she did that anyway. And it's just like, she's basically like laying in her son's arms and she's like, I'm so sorry, you know, I thought it was you all this time and stuff like that. And then she dies, but at least she said that like before she died, so that was kind of nice. And then Helen goes to the phone and calls Dr. Perry, you know, and she's finally able to speak to him for the first time and probably being like, get me the fuck out of here, oh my god, you know what I mean? But yeah, so there's that. So like I said, this is on Plex at the moment. So you can watch it for free, and it's really good. I liked it a lot. It's, you know, one of the best horror adjacent movies from the 1940s. You know, the cinematography is really nice. The acting is really good. I especially liked Ethel Barrymore's character. She was fantastic. But, you know, the woman that played Helen, Dorothy McGuire, was good too. Everybody in this is really, really good. And it's really suspenseful. Actually, some contemporary critics compared it like to an Alfred Hitchcock movie, so you know what I mean. You know, it is very Hitchcockian. Now, as I said, it'll be probably pretty obvious to modern viewers who the killer is, like from pretty early on. Because that's not a ding on the writing or anything like that. That's just because we've seen so many movies like that since you know, that time period. So it's like everybody's familiar with the tropes now in a way that they maybe weren't as much in the 1940s. So you know, so I don't really think that that's too much of a detriment. Because it's still a great watch in spite of that. And I really like the way they balanced just kind of like this creepy, suspenseful atmosphere with kind of occasional hints of levity. Like I said, there is funny stuff in it, like the whole running gag about the nurse that Mrs. Warren hates but still keeps her on the payroll for some reason, like that you never find out what that reason is. You know, and the stuff with Mrs. Oates, like Elsa Lanchester's character, like keeps tripping over the dog. And and there's also, I forgot to mention this, but Mrs. Oates, there's also like funny scenes where she's kind of a drunk, and so she's always like trying to conspire to kind of get, so there's like a really funny scene where she's trying to like go into the cellar and like get some brandy without the guy like without the professor like finding out about it. So she's kind of like brings a candle in there and she's like, oh whoops, I dropped it, and then she's like shoop, and then like put the stuff in the pocket. It's like, I thought that was like really funny. But like I said, it's not super zany, but it's just kind of like, I don't know, it was just kind of like drolly funny. I found it really amusing because I love Elsa Lanchester, and she's like super charming in this. She's not in it a huge amount because she just plays the housekeeper, but she's in it quite a bit. So I love the scene where she was like stealing the brandy from the cellar. So that was like pretty awesome. So I mean, if you're at all into classic horror from this era, yeah, you should definitely see this one. And like I said, if you're real into slashers, you might want to give it a look too, because it's kind of like a very early, it's not a slasher movie, but there are slasher elements. Like you'll see stuff that kind of came about like later on. So it might be interesting to see, like if you're into later slashers, like from a historical perspective, like it might be interesting to see where some of that came from. So yeah, it's, like I said, it's great. Everybody should see it. I don't talk about it that much in my history of horror video that I'm going to put up eventually whenever I get it and finish editing it, because I just mentioned it on there. But I think me mentioning it made me want to watch it again. So that's kind of why I ended up talking about it today. Danny says that sounds like the ending of Blood Rage. That's another one that we haven't done that one, have we? That was another one that I need to do. Tammy said off topic, but I saw where they're thinking about making another season of Mindhunters. I heard about that too. I kind of want to see that. Let's see. New Planet of the Apes. Yeah. Okay. So I guess I will wrap this up, like I said, because this has cheered me up, though. I'm talking about a movie about serial killers. This is a good movie. I like talking about movies. You know what I mean? So kind of take my mind off things for a little while. Tammy said, send Tom our best. Oh, I definitely will. Like I said, I might FaceTime with him later tonight, and we'll see what's going on. And for Wednesday night's show, I'll still do Wednesday night show, but like I said, there was a poll, and, you know, Jeffrey Epstein was in the poll, and obviously that won by a significant margin. And I was like, wait, I can't do the Jeffrey Epstein show without Tom here, because he really needs to be here for that. So I said, well, what I'll do is I'll just do on Wednesday night's show, because I'm 95% sure that Tom won't be back by the time of Wednesday night. Then I'll just do what the second place winner, which was NASA Zone F, which was something I didn't really know. There's not a huge amount of information about it, but I think it'll be a good show anyway. I didn't know anything about it, and I just kind of like looked it up, and it has to do with megalodons too. So we got to talk about megalodons. So I'll just do that one, because I said, well, I can do that one on my own without, because like I said, the Jeffrey Epstein thing, Tom has to be here for this. So I'm going to push that back till the following week so we can do that one together. So that's what we're going to do. But yeah. Tammy said, this chat has made my crappy day better. Oh, that's good. That's good. See, it always, like I said, it always kind of cheers me up, like, doing this. Because before I was just kind of like, man, it's just because I only just heard like the news from Tom like 20 minutes before this, and I was just kind of like, oh man, that's a bummer. And it's like, do I even want to? I thought it would be weird, but I was just kind of like, no, it'll be okay. Like it'll cheer me up. So there's that. But yeah, so hopefully you guys have a good rest of your evening, and thanks everybody for stopping by and talking to me tonight and cheering me up. And yeah, I'll see you guys again on Wednesday night. So have a good night.